Okay. And the agenda for today is the one that you can see on your screens. We will start with a short introduction, followed by a presentation on building a heating and cooling transition strategy and some examples from Adit Maya from TU Wien. And then we will have two case studies from the Acton Heat Support Facility. You know that the Acton Heat Support Facility is supporting several municipalities in Europe with their strategic heating and cooling planning. We will have the first case from LEA Hessen in Germany with Heike Beller. And then the second one is focused on the municipality of Zelzate in Belgium. And we will have Els de Wilder and Aloysia Polman presenting it. This will be followed by an interactive discussion and some closing words. So having said that, I would like to start with a little icebreaker to see if you're awake. So I will share now a poll with you. Okay, I hope you can see the questions here in your screen. First of all, I would like to ask you how much of Europe's energy consumption is used for heating and cooling? You have three options here, 33%, 45%, or 50%. Let's see if you've been attentive in other webinars and you remember. And sorry, I lost connection for a minute. Yeah. And the second question is about, does your municipality have a heating and cooling plan in place? So you can let us know if yes, they are still working on it, or they don't have it, it's not required in your region. Okay, we already have several answers. So I will close the poll and we can also see the results. So the correct answer for the first question is 50%. 50% of Europe's energy consumption is used for heating and cooling. So not so many of you were right, but well, we are here to learn. And I'm glad to see that the leading answer in the second question is yes, that most municipalities from the audience today have a heating and cooling plan in place or are working on it, but several others, they don't have it yet. I think it's the time to act on this now, and yeah, we will learn about that today. So having said that, I will move on to the next slide. And here I just wanted to show you a bit of big picture of why it's so important now to act on heating and cooling planning. What are the current policies in place? So we will start very generally with the international level. You know that the nations adopted the Glasgow Climate Pact, sorry, and this pact is aiming the 2020s to be a decade of climate actions with a priority of moving from fossil fuels to renewable energy sources. But if we go to the European level, we can see with the EU Green Deal that the EU wants to become the first climate neutral continent by 2050. This is a very ambitious goal, and obviously action has to be taken in heating and cooling, as we saw that this is half of Europe's energy consumption if we want to achieve these goals. I would also like to let you know about the Fit for 55 legislation package. As you might know, this legislation package wants to reduce greenhouse gas emissions by 55% by 2030. And more specifically, it also has a proposal for local authorities to prepare heating and cooling plans in municipalities over 50,000 inhabitants. Moving on, we have also the Covenant of Mayors, who is supporting municipalities with their climate action and CCAPs. But now we are centering more on, let's say, having specific plans for heating and cooling apart from the CCAPs. And as I will show you in the next slide, some local legislations are also taking actions in heating and cooling planning. So what I mean with this is that some regions are leading the way and are making heating and cooling plans mandatory for their municipalities. And I have 3 examples here where you can see, for example, Baden-Württemberg. They have the climate protection law, and this says that all municipalities over 20,000 inhabitants should have a heating and cooling plan in place, and the plans should be ready by the end of this year. So it's very urgent now for them to act on this. Then we have the Netherlands with the Dutch National Climate Agreement. And in this case, all municipalities in the Netherlands need to have a heating and cooling strategy. And this was the deadline was already in 2021. And finally, in Scotland, with the local heating and energy efficiency strategy statutory order, this says that all local authorities need to have a heating and cooling plan. A local authority there is not like a municipality, it's a bigger entity, let's say, could have several municipalities on it. And this plan should be ready also by the end of this year. So as you can see, yes, some regions and municipalities are already moving forward. So heating and cooling is a hot topic now. And I would like to now give the floor to Adit, who will tell us about heat and cooling planning, how to build a plan specifically. Adit is a research associate and PhD candidate at the Technical University of Vienna, and his research focuses on strategic heating and cooling planning aimed at energy efficiency and sectoral decarbonization. So Adit, the floor is yours. I will let you share your screen.
Thank you, Evan. Let me just share my screen.
Yep.
Do you see my screen?
Yes.
And the presentation view? Yeah.
Perfect. Thank you.
Okay. Yeah. Thank you, Evan. Good morning, everybody. Now I'll be presenting on the methods or steps for developing heating and cooling transition strategy. And as a disclaimer in the very beginning, I'd have to say that what I present today is more of a very generic overview of how the development of a transition strategy, the process looks like. But the actual strategy is very case specific, so there might be small or some major deviations to what I intend to present here today. So to start with, regarding the contents of the presentation, I will have an overview of the overall heating and cooling strategic planning process. And then we look into how this transition strategy actually fits into this overall process. The transition strategy, we look into how to develop a roadmap within the transition strategy, identify drivers and barriers over the overall process, and then potentially policy measures to intervene these barriers, and then on how the overall reviewing and reporting phase of the transition strategy development looks like. And then briefly look into the use of hot maps tool and how it can be used for the development or support the development of transition strategy. And a brief example of for the case of San Sebastian, where a case study using the hot maps tool was carried out for the development of this transition strategy. So to start with the overall strategic heating and cooling planning process, heating and cooling planning. But just to maybe briefly run through it. So basically we have these 3 or rather 4 different phases. We start with the first and second phase, where the idea is to identify potential targets in your heating and cooling planning process, and based on it, identify we have working groups within a local authority who would be dedicated to the overall planning process and work towards this identified vision. And then also involving relevant stakeholders at all phases of the planning process. But once these setup is done within the local authority, the idea would be to move into this first loop of the planning process, which firstly includes the identification of inventory and potentials. This was briefly also, we talked about this in the last training session, where the idea is to collect relevant data and to adjust the data or store data in a way that it can be used for further used for the planning process, which may include data on potential or the demand or the existing technologies. And then followed by, once the data is available, we look into the zoning aspect of identifying locations within a city, let's say, where different measures can actually be implemented so as to ensure high impact on the overall decarbonization of the heating cooling sector. And then we also look into the assessment of scenarios based on the data available, how the future pathway can be developed under different parameter sensitivities. And so once we have different scenarios, today's focus, we move into this, the first part, which is the heating and cooling transition strategy, which are again based on these identified scenarios, which are in turn dependent on data available. And once this transition strategy is overview of the transition strategy is known, we look into the policy measures and identify how we can actually implement these follow these set transition strategies. So in general, transition strategy as a whole comprises of a roadmap, basically giving us an overview or the direction in which we need to go towards achieving this overall vision in the heating and cooling sector. And the strategy and the roadmap itself consists of various roadmap elements, which once again defines the direction we go for the planning process. So when I say roadmap elements, there could be different aspects to it. So starting with the inventory, again, the roadmap elements could be just simply setting up a data inventory for the heating and cooling planning process. Or it could be, for instance, we've been working in cases where we focus on the excess heat potential or waste heat for instance, for district heating planning, or also identification of renewable energy potential for in a specific region. And in case of scenarios, the roadmap elements, for instance, could be identification of replicable solutions for building archetypes. So what renovation measures to what kind of buildings is more applicable in certain region. And then also planning for the expansion or construction of a new district heating grid. So basically, all these roadmap elements kind of define the direction in which our point number 6 here, heating transition strategy, is oriented towards. And that is what we'll be looking furthermore into detail now. So to start with the heating and cooling transition process, the overall process of developing this transition strategy is divided into 4 aspects. Firstly, it would be starting with the understanding of the area of interest. So what aspect are we focusing on? So for instance, are we focusing on integration or increasing the renewable shares in the heating cooling energy mix, or are we interested in expansion of district heating, or are we interested in renewable energy potential? So for any area we are working on, definition and having this overall vision is the starting point of it all. And once we have this defined area of interest, second would be upcoming to the structuring, where the main idea would be understanding this, having the overview of the baseline and how the data collected can further be used, as I mentioned, to create these scenarios. And then the third and let's say the integral part of the transition strategy would be developing or creating or drafting of these roadmaps, which are basically gives you a chronological order in which different steps need to be carried out so that in a medium or a short term, the overall aim of the transition strategy can be met. And this overall process, so the roadmap also provides us with the timeline and specific milestones within the project. So it can drive the overall process forward. And then overall, once this roadmap is created, it's always necessary to have this continuous analysis or engagement of stakeholders to ensure that the direction we are oriented towards is correct. And then also we look into continuous review and progress monitoring over the, let's say, over the lifetime of this transition strategy. A little more. So as I mentioned, the roadmap is an integral part of it. And what does a roadmap do with regards to transition strategy? It basically provides decision makers with an overview of the interrelationships, conditions, and opportunities for change of the process over time. And as I mentioned, it gives a specific direction aimed at this short or medium-term goal. So, for instance, I have an example here of a transition pathway from 2040 to 2020.
He's not coming.
Yeah, I also didn't notice, but he put it.
Question. Okay. Okay. So from 2020 to 2040. So, for instance, here we are trying to implement large-scale heat pumps. With the overview of this transition roadmap, we could identify different drivers and barriers which could boost or rather hinder the implementation of this overall vision. So for instance, with regards to large-scale heat pumps, there could be the case that the lack of business model could be a large barrier, and this could hinder the process of achieving the overall goal. However, the societal pressure in terms of the aspects and developments that support transition could be kind of a driver that is pushing this. Basically, once we have this roadmap set into place with a overall target, we get this overview of and identify opportunities and barriers that could hinder the process. So once we know these barriers with the help of the roadmap, the next step would be to identify these policy measures which can further work towards overcoming these barriers. So for instance, here, in case of the lack of business models, the possibility of providing funding opportunities to overcome this barrier could be a possible way forward. So with this roadmap, it gives a clear vision of what kind of policy measures would be needed for the overall transition process. And so basically, the policy measures are identifying policy interventions that are needed to meet the strategies and goals on a long term, on the long and short run. However, so these policies are, for instance, the idea would be that the working group proposes certain sets of policy measures to the stakeholder groups and identifies policies that can actually be legally implemented and supported by the stakeholders. And also overall, this step would also focus on identifying implementable projects with high success rates. So for instance, if you are planning for renovation measures, it's certain as an overall target of the transition strategy, we could find projects or regions in the city where actual implementation could be made, and that could be supported by local stakeholders. So this would be identification of these such projects would be an integral part of the process as well, and also for the policy measures, also translating these EU frameworks from the Energy Efficiency Directive or Renewable Energy Directive into local policies, and how this can be how this can fit into the local targets is something that needs to be done in the policy measure. So the transition strategy basically is giving us an overview of what is required, and then based on what is required, we define policy measures to overcome the barriers identified. So that was how the general process works. But we can also, if I don't know if you're aware of the hot maps tool, but I guess if you have been present in the previous training sessions, and the hot maps tool is basically a two-stage online tool, which in one hand provides open source data sets on heating and cooling planning for all EU 27 countries, and also provides a set of calculation modules which can estimate different heating cooling scenarios or different heating cooling aspects. With the hot maps tool, it was basically designed for as we discussed, the overall strategic planning process, and also focuses on this transition strategy development. So here I present, I mean, this is kind of a complicated picture, but it is trying to show how different calculation modules available within the hot maps tool is can be used to develop these different scenarios that can be further assessed based on which policy measures can be developed. So hot maps is basically providing us with a quantitative base on which policy measures can be implemented. So maybe just to quickly touch on this, for instance, the hot maps, there's a calculation module which estimates heating demand in your region, and based on that, to what extent, let's say, it calculates to what extent district heating grids can be implemented here. And based on that, again, we see also we can add aspects of renewable energy potential in your specific region. And then also, as I mentioned, excess heat or other decentral supply options. And based on this, basically, we are able to calculate different scenarios. And these scenarios are then, again, iterated amongst the stakeholders to identify the most, let's say, the most realistic possibilities for the future. And then the strategy, the transition strategy is then again developed based on these scenarios. So the hot maps tool provides a possibility of using, evaluating these scenarios. Just to simplify and give you a more realistic perspective, how this tool was applied in a case study conducted for the city of San Sebastian. So there, the city were interested in two aspects of these roadmap elements. Firstly, on the identification of replicable solutions. So what renovation measures could be implemented for different building stocks. So the questions they were interested in were, what are the renovation targets? So what could be the renovation targets of the city as a whole? And again, in which buildings could these renovation measures be implemented? And where exactly within the city would be more realistic or impactful to implement these renovation measures? What could be the economic impacts of it, the investment costs, created turnover, and what kind of policies would actually be needed to implement these renovation measures? And the second element they were interested were in the identification of feasible district heating network. So there they were trying to use the heating demand density, the renovation rates, again, to identify potential locations for district heating grids. This I just put an example for Vienna because I couldn't really get a good picture for San Sebastian. So just to see how the outputs of the hot maps tool looks like. And based on that, different scenarios were created. For example, how different rates of renovation would impact the overall energy savings. And then based on that, the overall cost of the implementation of these scenarios and the cost per unit of energy saved were calculated, just to give an overview of which scenario would be the most optimum. And then based on that, some of the visual results that the hot maps tool provided for San Sebastian was, for example, seeing if, say, considering a base year scenario of certain heating demand densities, if certain rates, 24% energy saving renovation rates are implied, how the demand density would look like. And based on these renovation rates, also the potential areas for district heating under different demand density scenarios were calculated. So basically the tool provided, in one hand, the scenarios for renovation and how it impacts the costs, and also how these renovations in turn impacts the feasibility of district heating networks. And in general, for drivers and barriers, in case of San Sebastian, the city's active participation in climate change and the motivation to work as its first of its kind heating and cooling strategic plan process were the major drivers identified in case of San Sebastian. However, the heating and cooling sector was not much of a priority for them, and district heating supply in terms of investment costs, as well as the existing structure of the city, was kind of seen as the barriers. So based on these identified drivers and barriers, certain roadmap milestones were suggested for them. So for instance, the need for a detailed feasibility study, because what hot maps renovation scenarios provide is just an overview on a higher planning level, but for detailed technical assessment, a further renovation measure would be needed. And also the financial aspect, because that was one of the major barriers would be needed, and identification and planning for financial assistance was a major milestone identified from these assessment studies. And also the policies on encouraging ownership refurbishments for new building owners and existing building owners was something that was identified as potential milestones in case of Saint Sebastian. And again, similar studies were conducted for other case studies within the Hot Maps project, which you can probably find in the link here if you're interested. So that is how the application of Hot Maps could be used for the transition strategy. And finally, to bring in conclusion to the overall transition strategy, and not just to Saint Sebastian. As I mentioned, the transition strategy provides this very goal-oriented path, which gives you a strict timeline and milestones towards developing or this pathway. And however, the overall process is very data-driven. And as I mentioned, the Hot Maps tool provides you this this assistance on developing this quantitative base based on which further policy measures can be implemented. And the overall strategic transition process needs the consideration of both the demand and supply side. Let's say on the demand side, with regards to energy efficiency, and on the supply side, with regards to the renewable energy integration. And as the overall strategic heating and cooling planning process here, also the active involvement of stakeholders are quite important, and also identified where the financing mechanisms would be an interesting aspect to look into for the strategic planning process. So having said that, I would just conclude my slides, but also to mention that within the Act on Heat project, we provide similar services, which could help plan or similar. What was done for Saint Sebastian, similar could be done for any city within the EU 27. So if you're interested, we would request you to contact us and we could further work on it. So yeah, that's all from my side. Thank you.
Thank you, Adit. Yes, I think that we'll mention something a bit later about the support facility as well. So we will give you more details about how you can get on board with the next one. So the next speaker is Heike Böhle, who works as the project lead for energy concepts, contracting and municipal heat planning for LEA Hessen, which is the German state of Hessen's regional energy agency. And her team is the main contact for municipalities in that state on municipal heat planning. So I'll hand it over to you. Please share your presentation.
Yeah, thank you, George. And hello from my side, and hello from Hessen. So in Hessen, we have started working on the topic of municipal heat planning, well, like 2 years ago, but then really things sped up in last year, because there was a new regulation last year on heat planning in Hessen. So a lot of municipalities were informed about that topic, are curious about that topic, start thinking about making a municipal heat plan. And at LEA Hessen, we are their first contact. I'll start with a short introduction, who is LEA, and then talk about how we are involved in the topic of heat planning and how we work together with the Act on Heat project. So here we go. The LEA is the Landesenergieagentur Hessen, which is the a state energy agency Hessen. And so basically we are an agency that is sponsored by the Hessian Ministry for Economy, Energy and Living, and also by some other ministries such as the Environmental Ministry. And our job is to consult, to give advice, to be the first point of contact on all kinds of topics concerning climate change and energy transition. So right now we're about 60 people at the Landesenergieagentur, and we provide advice to different actors. That can be citizens, that can be municipalities, but also businesses. And And we do this, this is cost-free for the citizens, municipalities and businesses, because we get the money from the state to be there as a very low level, without any barriers, point of contact concerning the energy transition. Now, our core team for municipal heat planning, that's me and my colleague Patrick. There are other colleagues that are touching on different aspects of municipal heat planning, but that's basically the core team. And we also include other topics in our consulting, so not just municipal heat planning in a very condensed form, but also energy concepts as a larger part, and also contracting models that focus more on the implementation of such energy concepts and heat plans. So what do we do, and what is the challenge for our topic? So we focus on local energy transitions, in our case, in the heating sector. And what we do is we go out to the municipalities and try to inform them about their different options. And we showed it in this little house, to either reduce energy consumption in the heating sector, to use renewable energy in buildings, or to use renewable energy within district heating concepts. And therefore we need, as a base for all of this municipal heating transition, we need the competence in the municipalities, and we need the municipalities because they are the actors that are there, that are in place, that are nearest to the citizens, and that have the possibilities to engage and to lead local actors to bring them together. And we as LEA, we don't make the municipal heat plan. That's very important. We're not the one who does the local heat planning. We're not the one who's implementing a district heating. We're the one who gives advice, who consults. We provide guidelines. We establish networks where the different actors can get in contact with each other. We support. We also try to showcase best practice examples, and therefore support the local actors. But the real actors, that's not us, it's the local municipalities. Yeah, so who are those local municipalities in Hessen, and what is going on in Hessen on municipal heat planning? So the municipal heat plan is the base for further decisions on the local heat supply. So it's really just the first step. To have an analytical tool, to have an overview, but it's not necessarily the total implementation of that. And from November this year onwards, municipal heat planning will be mandatory for municipalities with more than 20,000 citizens. That's very similar to what you already showcased in your first presentation, what happened in Baden-Württemberg, which is the neighboring region to Hessen. So we learned from them. And also, so there's this mandatory heat planning, and then there's also the possibilities for smaller municipalities to do voluntarily the heat planning. And there are grants and subsidies for these municipalities that enables them to get there. And we as Landesenergieagentur, we support and we consult on these topics. So this is just the legal aspect of it, which says that there's mandatory heat planning in Hessen, and that concerns of the 422 Hessian municipalities, 59 are addressed by this mandatory heat planning. That doesn't sound much, but it is the big municipalities. So more than half of the citizens of our region live in these 59 municipalities and cities. And at the same time, there's also an obligation for district heating providers. And while the municipalities have to do a heat plan for the whole municipality, district heating providers are obligated to develop a transformation plan for their existing district heating networks. So basically, also the companies, the energy providers have an obligation, and the municipality has an obligation. This is something That's also in the law, that's why it's in German. But basically what it says, you can see in the pictures on the right-hand side, what is this obligation to do a heat plan? It's on a first step, what we call Bestandsanalyse, that would be an analysis of the status quo. So where do we stand? Where is the heat needed? How much heat is transported by which energieträger? Is it via gas? Is it via oil? Is it renewable energy? How's the heating organized right now in the status quo? And from there on, you go to the analysis of the potentials for renewable energy and for energy efficiency. And the third step, you have the provision of a scenario. Where do you want to go? What is your optimal scenario? And also in which areas should district heating be established and which areas should be kept decentralized with the heating directly in the building. Yes, so this is where we stand. We're here at the green arrow. So we do have a legal obligation for some municipalities that will start from November onwards. We are in the process of having a Verordnung, also a legal document that specifies what exactly needs to be done. And then we have in parallel a discussion in Germany on a federal level that there should also be a federal law, but we don't really know how that will develop. It's still in the political debate, so, and we all know politics are unpredictable, so we will see what also will happen on the higher level, on the federal level in Germany. And how does all this connect with Act on Heat? We started working together last summer, mainly with Ali Aydemir and Ayosha, who's here today too, I think. Ayosha, I saw him earlier. And we started with a workshop together with the municipalities. Last summer, there were like 8 municipalities who wanted to develop a local heat plan. And so the Act on Heat project allowed us to have your expertise for the municipalities in Hessen and to give them a start, to give them some orientation. What is a heat plan? What can you do with that? Why is this a helpful tool? And we had another input from you at one of our events, and we could participate in training webinars. And also now recently, Act on Heat provided us with a slide deck of best practice examples of implementation of best practice heat provision solutions. And that was also very interesting for us, and we will still looking how we can use this and also present this to our municipalities. So these are just some impressions how we started with the Act on Heat workshop, and also consulted and discussed with the municipalities what are the different roles within the municipalities, what are questions, what are barriers for them. And that was really a good start into getting these municipalities started. And from there on, we at LEA have started to build our support facility. So we provide information, we have a guideline, we have a heat map for Hessen that will shortly be published. And we're planning on an online self-service on heat planning. We provide a network. So we started last summer with about 10 municipalities. Right now, there are more than 80 actors in our network, about 40 municipalities that have started working on a heat plan or doing at least the first steps for that. And we also provide workshops, presentations. We go to events to connect with these municipalities, and we provide individual consulting and support for them. We do this mainly on municipal heat planning, but as I said, we have a larger team at LEA to also give them some advice on district planning, on planning the investments itself. So planning to establish a new district heating, for example, and also an implementation. There, we do not implement anything ourselves, but we give hints, for example, where can you get subsidies, where can you get grants to get these things going. So yeah, this is just some impressions from our last events, how we work and with whom we work. And that's it from my side. And I'm open if there are any questions from you or discussions.
Thank you very much, Heike. Thank you for the interesting case of Hessen and showing us how you've been working with onHeat. On this regard, I think there was some question in the chat. Maybe you can see it already, or otherwise we might have some time later to answer. But now
I haven't read them yet.
yeah, no worries. But now we would move to another case in the municipality of Zelzate in Belgium. So we will have now Els de Wilder, an environment officer in the Department of Space and Housing and the Department of Environment Climate of Zelzate municipality, and also Alyosha Polman, an onHeat project partner from Fraunhofer EC that has supported the municipality using the Thermos tool for heating and cooling planning. So we will have both of them presenting this case. I would ask you to be quite short, please, as we are running out of time. But yeah, Els, the floor is yours. Mm-hmm.
Do you see my screen?
Yes, if you can do the
Yes.
presentation.
Yes, okay.
Perfect.
Hello. In 2017, we started with exploratory talks with several partners, so like province, the company ArcelorMittal, several municipalities, and then in 2018, 2019, we have collected the heat demand of general companies at Zelzate. Like the large heat demanders like school, swimming pool companies. Further, we have pre-calculation workouts, and so we have a study of the feasibility of a heat network in detail. And the results have indicated that the heat network between ArcelorMittal, a large company in Ghent, and the psychiatric centrum of can be economically viable. But it's also and it also appears that a further link to Zelzate Center is less obvious, but that can be visible with measure with optimizations and with additional support. For example, concentrate civil engineers, consumers, and oblige new developments. In the context of achieving the set climate objective, local government Zelzate seems the connection of a heat network for ArcelorMittal Ghent to Zelzate Center is a crucial element to make this possible. Appropriate dimension which will be necessary, so not only the psychiatric centrum can be served, but also other applicants in the Zelzate Center. Appropriate dimension and function of Zelzate Center translate into an additional cost that relative strongly burdens a first phase up to the psychiatric center. Thus, lock-ins must be avoided. So we have asked to Thermos and onHeat to make a detailed study. And while we're collecting data for Thermos onHeat, another opportunity came up across the border with the Netherlands. A heat grid was also being considered. Therefore, the question was raised to a feasibility of a heat network between ArcelorMittal Ghent, center of Zelzate, center of Sasfahand, and Gargel in Sasfahand. Proposed that will be a robust support network serving the municipalities. Sasfahand Zelzate, where there is a constant heat demand. There are also 2 heat suppliers, which is a great advantage. The selected project concerns the feasibility study of this connection, the heat network from ArcelorMittal to the center of Zelzate. This is ArcelorMittal, this is Zelzate, this is Sasfahand, and he is Gargel. Okay, Alocia?
Yes. Hello, everyone. Let me share my screen as well. Oh, where's it here? So can everybody see my screen?
Yes.
Okay. So I would like to give you a quick overview about the results that have been collected using the Thermos tool for Zelzate and Sasfahand. So I would briefly start with the preparation process, give you a quick overview over the scenarios that have been investigated and some key takeaways. So on the right, as Els already said, you can see the research area with Sasfahand in the north and Zelzate in the south. We have a connecting pipe between these communities, and we have the 2 sources, Cargill in Sasfahand and ArcelorMittal in Zelzate. So on the first step, the municipality provided some data to us, but to ensure that this is a good basis for the Thermos tool, we had to process it further. So the municipalities provided meter data for their main demanders and the public buildings, and they also provided demand data for residential and non-residential buildings on a neighborhood scale, as you can see depicted in this figure. So in the next step, the data had to be processed into an address level resolution. For that purpose, a GIS file for the research area and corresponding LiDAR data have been downloaded from the regional open data portal. The files then have been matched using the QGIS program to ensure that each building polygon in the research area is enriched with height data, because that way we could run the Thermos calculations in a 3-dimensional model, which estimations are more correct than the 2D only model. So in the next step, we had a shapefile with height data. This then has been filtered for actual use per building. That essentially means that the buildings that are unlikely to be heated, for example, warehouses or garden lodges, have been deleted from the file. This enhancement process then finally resulted in an estimation accuracy of the tool of roughly 99% for the research area overall. And some random checks for buildings which had known demands have shown that the estimation accuracy was also very precise on single building level. For example, the library in Zelzate could be estimated with an accuracy of 101%, so only a very slight overestimation when you compare the Thermos estimations versus the metered actual consumption data. So then after the database was enhanced and then 3 network design approaches have been tested. In the first approach, both city centers were connected. This means that all mandatory buildings in each center and a random selection of additional buildings were connected to the network. This approach has been tested with various connection rates. Then for the second approach, which is the line densification approach, in this setup, all mandatory buildings are connected, and only a random selection of buildings along the backbone pipes that connect the mandatory buildings has been connected to the network as well. And this approach also was tested with different connection rates. The third approach is then a mixed use approach. That means for Zelzate that the line densification approach was chosen, and for Sasfahand the center approach was tested. This is due to findings from the two previous approaches, whose results indicated that a mixed use approach might result in the best overall performance. And again, also this approach was tested with different connection rates. So here are the key takeaways. Extensive pipe work in case of the center-only approaches, they became financially infeasible. The connecting pipe between Sas van Gent and Zelzate was always necessary if more than 50% of additional buildings were connected in Zelzate. That applies for the line densification approach. It was around 20% for the center approach. Then security of supply, that means that this demand could be met while only be connected to one source if one source were to be shut down. It was only guaranteed up to a connection rate of 20% in the line densification approaches, and above this connection rate, both sources were required to meet the demands. The best use case in the study was a mixed approach of connecting all mandatory buildings in both city centers, plus 80% of buildings in Sas van Gent Center and 50% along the lines in Zelzate. This setup resulted in the highest number of total connected buildings while still being financially feasible. So far from my side, thanks for your attention.
Thank you both, Els and Alyosha. Since we are very short on time, unfortunately, I don't think we will be able to orally go through too many questions. I will point out that there was an interesting question directed towards Heike about the roles of municipalities having in-house. I think that's very interesting. There's also one from Yuri that was about sectoral integration. I don't know who that was directed to, but anybody who can respond to that in writing would be good. What I would briefly ask before we do our wrap up is I'll start off with the same question for Els and the same question for Heike. So I'll start with Els. What are your next steps? What is it that you're going to be doing with this now that you've done the support facility?
Yes, there will be a regular consultation between Zelzate, Terneuzen province of East Flanders and province of Zeeland, because we will still to be able to realize this project maybe in a part, and we continue to look for subsidies of other possibilities.
Thank you. And Heike, what is next for municipalities that you're working with?
That's very different actually, because we have municipalities that already did a lot of the preliminary work, that have already some of the data, and that are already working with a service provider to put up the heat plants on total. We also have municipalities that have started their heat plan for the whole municipalities, but on the sidelines they have feasibility studies for district heating going, and we have municipalities that have just started and have no idea at all and start with their first sessions with us to approach the topic of heat planning. So there's really quite a diverse field with some first movers and some who still haven't looked into that at all.
Very good. I think that it's obvious that there will be variety, but I'm hopeful that what you've already learned through the support facility can be applicable to them, and you also have your own in-house expertise as well. And likewise, I'm sure that Zelzate will continue to take advantage of what hot maps and thermos tools and Act on Heat support facility have given them. So I will then hand over the wrap up to my colleague Julian.
Thank you, George. Let me share the screen again. 1 second. Okay, so as you know, this is the last session of our training program in Act on Heat. However, I would like to let you know that there will be another round of training webinars, but this will be most probably in the beginning of 2024. We'll have to wait some months still. But in the meanwhile, I would like to let you know that the support facility call for applications will open soon. So if you would like to get supported by the onHeat experts in the same way as LEA Hessen or Zelzate, as we have seen today, then I encourage you to apply to this support facility. This will open in the last week of April, more or less. Stay tuned in the website and the newsletter. And I also would like to let you know about another opportunity that LEA is working on. We are working on a strategic heating and cooling support package for city representatives. So if you are a city representative and you would like to learn about partnerships models and financing of new and refurbished heating and cooling infrastructure, then you can join the next module on the 28th of March 2023. We will send the link in a follow-up email when I send you the recording of this session too. And finally, if you came to the last session, you know, you can get a certification for attending the training webinars and having completed a questionnaire. We already received several of them, but if you would still like to get a certification and you missed the chance, I would like to give you still the opportunity to fill in the questionnaire. You can see the recording of the last webinar in our website. And yeah, I will also send the link in a follow-up email for this. So having said this, I would like to thank you all for being here today. I hope you start working in heating and cooling planning in the next months if you are not already. And yeah, have a nice day and afternoon. Thank you, everyone.
Thank
I
you.
thank you.
Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Goodbye.